Welcome to today's webinar on managing your business during coronavirus, covering reporting, regulations, and tax. I'm Andy Harrison, and I'm from the Department for Business, Energy and Industrial Strategy. Before we start, a couple of housekeeping points. There are controls at the bottom of your screen to pause the session and for adjusting video quality and sound. You can ask questions during this webinar by selecting the Q&A symbol on the right-hand side of your screen, typing your question in the Compose box, and then selecting Send. A recording of the webinar and links to useful information will be circulated to all participants later today. Next slide, please. The government is supporting businesses and their employees with a package of measures during this period of unprecedented disruption. The Coronavirus Business Support Hub brings together all government guidance on running your business during coronavirus. To visit the hub, search Business Support on gov.uk. You can use the Business Support Finder tool on gov.uk to see what support is available for you and your business. Answer 9 simple questions to receive a list of the support your business may be entitled to. As well as introducing new support packages, the government is introducing temporary changes to allow businesses under particular pressure from the impacts of coronavirus the flexibility to better manage their businesses. A range of business rules have been temporarily relaxed to make it easier for businesses to continue working. For more information, search rules that have been relaxed to help businesses during the coronavirus pandemic on gov.uk. Next slide, please. Today's webinar will help set out some of the ways that rules have been temporarily relaxed or revised to support businesses during this time of disruption. I'm delighted to be joined by a number of colleagues from across government to tell you more about changes to right-to-work checks, filing reports and accounts, and paying taxes. Before we address these areas in detail, I wanted to provide a short overview of some of the wider rule relaxations available to support business as part of the government's coronavirus economic response package. As I go through these announcements will appear in the webinar chat box that will contain links to the relevant government web pages. So if you open the chat box, you'll see these announcements. If you're an employer, a change to regulations will allow up to 4 weeks of unused leave to be carried into the next 2 leave years, easing the requirements on business to ensure that workers take the statutory amount of annual leave in any 1 year. The changes will ensure all employers affected by coronavirus have the flexibility to allow workers to carry over leave at a time when granting annual leave could leave them short-staffed. The government has also taken the decision to suspend enforcement of the gender pay gap deadlines for this reporting year 2019-2020. The decision means there will be no expectation on employers to report their data. The implementation of reforms to off-payroll working rules have also been delayed for 12 months. The reforms will now come in on the 6th of April 2021. To enable vital services to continue and frontline workers to get to work, all cars, vans and motorcycles which usually require an MOT test will be granted a 6-month exemption from needing a test from the 30th of March 2020. The Department for Transport has also put in place temporary changes in professional driver qualification requirements and driver's hours rules. Sector-specific changes have also been introduced. For example, planning rules have been relaxed so pubs and restaurants can operate as hot food takeaways. A temporary change to the rules around the destruction of spoiled beer, cider, wine or made wine have also been announced. New temporary measures will safeguard the UK High Street against aggressive debt recovery actions during the coronavirus pandemic. Statutory demands and winding up petitions issued to commercial tenants will be temporarily voided, and changes will be made to the use of commercial rent arrears recovery. And a revaluation of business rates will no longer take place in 2021 to help reduce uncertainty for firms affected by the impacts of coronavirus. The government is extending deadlines to some consultations and calls for evidence to give all stakeholders more time to submit their views and allow them to fully engage with consultations and the policy-making process in relation to various support measures. Visit the Business Support Hub on gov.uk for more information on managing your business during coronavirus, including advice for specific sectors. And to get the latest updates directly to your inbox, you can subscribe to the Coronavirus Business and Employers Bulletin.
My name is Lindsay Scott, and I'm just going to run through the presentation about the recent changes to right-to-work checks that have been implemented since the 30th of March in response to the coronavirus crisis. As you probably all know, right-to-work checks have been a responsibility for employers since 1997, and that has then been underpinned since 2008 by a civil penalty scheme. Therefore, employers are expected to undertake right-to-work checks on all prospective employees, regardless of their race or nationality, to determine that they are legally in the UK and they have the permissions in place to undertake the work in question. Next slide, please. The reason that we have employer right-to-work checks is to ensure that businesses are not undercut by illegal immigration, and that employers also play their part in helping the government to control illegal migration. Next slide, please. Undertaking the prescribed right-to-work checks will provide a statutory excuse against a civil penalty should an employer be found to be working illegally. Employers should look to identify forgeries and whether a person or not is the rightful holder of the document. Where an employer is found to be employing an illegal worker and they haven't undertaken the checks prior to the commencement of the employment, employees could face a civil penalty of up to £20,000 per illegal employee. Next slide, please. The next slide runs you through the right-to-work checks as set out of the Code of Practice. These are the normal standard checks. And I'm going to run you through these today because some of the normal standard checks can still be undertaken while the temporary measures are in place. So normally an employer would obtain the original documents from the prospective employee or from their existing employee who requires a follow-up check. They would check those documents are valid, and that must be done in the presence of the holder. They would confirm that the documents refer to the prospective employee or the existing employee. So, for example, that the person looks to be the same age as the document suggests, that there is a likeness to that person where there's photo evidence provided. And once they've done that and they are clear that the employer is happy that the documents are valid, that they belong to that employer, the employer should make and retain a clear copy of that check and record the date that the check was undertaken. Employers should retain a copy of this check for the duration of their employment and for 2 years after that. In January 2019, the Home Office introduced the Right to Work online status checking service, which means that individuals who have a valid biometric residence card or permit or status under the EU settlement scheme can evidence their right to work to an employer by using the view a job applicant's right to work details on gov.uk. This enables the prospective employee to see their own record with the Home Office and then take a decision as to whether they want to share that record with the prospective employer, and they do this by means of a share code. So the employer will receive a share code by email, and the employer should enter that, should go into gov.uk, access view a job applicant's right to work details, input the share code, and you will see that person's record. Now, the online service enables you to undertake that right to work check without the person being physically present. So you can undertake that check via a video call, because you don't need to check the documents to see whether they're valid, because the information you're getting is coming directly from Home Office systems. However, I must point out that you must take the copy from the view a job applicant's right to work details. You must not rely on the information that the job applicant sees, because that will not provide you with a statutory excuse against a civil penalty. Next slide, please. As a result of the coronavirus pandemic, right to work checks have been amended. This has been done to make sure that employers can still carry out those checks, and that job applicants can still access the employment market. The changes that have been made mean that where you would once have seen a person face to face, you can now arrange a video call with that person, and you, prior to the video call, you would have asked that individual to send you a scanned or a photocopy or a photo of their original documents. During the video call, you can ask the prospective employee to hold up their original documents. You can check the copies that you've received, and again, undertake the same check in the same way. Next slide, please. Due to global travel restrictions and some of the contingency measures implemented across many of the visa issuing services within the Home Office, some individuals will be unable to evidence their right to work, and some individuals with biometric residence permits and cards that have expired and have not been reissued out due to coronavirus will not be able to evidence their right to work using either the normal documentation or through the online service, the online checking service. So at this time, you should take extra care to ensure that no one is discriminated against as a job applicant or an employee because they're unable to show you their documents. In those instances where individuals have either no documentation or their documentation is out of date, employers should use the employer checking service, which is an online form which can be accessed from gov.uk, and a response is usually provided within 5 working days. The response that will be provided will be a positive verification notice, and this positive verification notice provides the employer with a statutory excuse against a civil penalty for 6 months. This should give sufficient time for all the relevant documents to catch up, and an individual should be able to evidence their status from that point. If the individual is still unable to evidence their status, you can use the employer checking service again and request another positive verification notice, request another check, and again, if they still have the required leave, you will receive a further positive verification notice. Next slide, please. So, how do you conduct those checks during the coronavirus pandemic? We've briefly run through that before. So it's obtain scanned documents of one or more of the original documents from the prospective employee, arrange a video call and check those documents against the individual and get the individual to hold up the original documents to the camera, and again record that check. If there is any opportunity for you to conduct a standard right to work check as set out in the Code of Practice, providing that measures are in place to adhere to the government social distancing measures, then you can still continue to carry out a normal right to work check, a standard right to work check, or if circumstances allow, you can use the online checking service. Next slide, please. Lifting the temporary adjustments. Temporary adjustments will be kept under review, and we will provide sufficient advance notification of when they will end. After the measures end, you will be able to carry out retrospective checks on employees who started work during the measures or required a follow-up check during the measures. If you search Right to Work Checks and Employers Guide on gov.uk, this will provide you with the required information of how to conduct a retrospective work check in the standard way. Next slide, please. The retrospective check should be carried out within 8 weeks of the coronavirus measures ending, and both checks should be kept for your records. However, please be aware that we are monitoring the situation, and we're monitoring feedback from key stakeholders, so we will keep the 8-week period under review. If at any point when you carry out the retrospective check you find your employee does not have permission to be in the UK, you must end their employment. If a check you have undertaken during the adjusted period was a standard check, done in compliance with the Code of Practice, then you do not need to undertake a further retrospective check. Our advice would be to consider if there is any opportunity within your interaction with the employees to undertake a standard right to work check using the prescribed documents set out in the Code of Practice, right of reconciliation and prevent nugatory work. We understand from feedback from various stakeholders that when individuals are actually turning up to work, they are still requesting them to bring their passports as evidence of identity and who they are. So if that prevents the opportunity to undertake a standard right to work check, it would be sensible to do that then. What this means for business, sorry, next slide, I got ahead of myself there. What this means for business, we are committed to supporting employers during this national emergency, and we understand that it's not always possible to do the checks in the right way. Although right to work checks do remain necessary, and it's necessary because we want to make sure that we protect our good employers from individuals who are seeking to work illegally, and also that vulnerable individuals are protected from unscrupulous employers who seek to profit from illegal migration. Next slide, please. In terms of civil penalties, which I would understand would bother you all significantly, you will not be liable for a civil penalty where you have carried out the adjusted check set out in the coronavirus guidance published on gov.uk. If you search right to work checks COVID-19 on Google or gov.uk, the latest coronavirus right to work guidance is there and available for you. So as long as you undertake an adjusted check and you follow this up or can evidence that you have a standard check as set out in the Code of Practice, once the measures have been stood down, then you will not be liable for a civil penalty. At this moment in time, the Home Office are not seeking to take any enforcement action against employers while we deal with this crisis. Hello, Andy. So just looking at the live questions that are coming in, one of the questions is, what is the difference between an adjusted check and a standard check? The standard checks and the documents that you need to see to undertake a normal right to work check are set out in the Code of Practice, the Right to Work Code of Practice and the Right to Work Employers Guidance, which is available on gov.uk. If you are undertaking the checks that are set out in the way they are set out in the Code of Practice, that is a normal check. The normal check requires you to see the original document, to have the original document in your hand whilst you are able to see the person who you are employing. The adjusted check means that you can accept a scanned document and undertake that check via a video call. So you will be able to hold, touch, feel, look at the original document. So that is the key difference between the adjusted check and the standard check. But as we've said, it's probably very sensible to go and read the COVID Right to Work 19 guidance. That sets that out more clearly, and it is also useful to make sure that you are aware of what your statutory requirements are in undertaking a normal check by viewing the Right to Work Code of Practice. One of the questions that says, can I accept a picture of a document that I can't check in person? You can for the duration of the adjusted checks, but we would expect you to be doing a video call with that individual. And whilst you can't check it in person, you can see that that individual does hold that document. The whole point of being able to do that and undertaking those checks, as it reduces the risk to you as an employer of taking on somebody who has no legal right to work in the UK. And then one of the other questions is, when the pandemic ends, will I need to check right to work documents as usual if I've done the temporary checks now? You will need to undertake right to work checks on the documents as usual for individuals you have employed or who you have undertaken a follow-up check for during the pandemic period, if they are still employed by your company. If the employment has been temporary and they are no longer working for you when the pandemic ends, then there is no need to do a right to work check on that individual. However, if you want to maintain a statutory excuse against a civil penalty, you should have seen and checked the original documents, unless of course you've undertaken an online status check, in which case you do need to do a retrospective check. I hope that makes that clear. Thank you, Andy.